Politico recently interviewed about 24 individuals who work in the White House. There are at least that many people on a daily basis leaking information about the White House. We get this every single day. And now we're getting some ideas about the current state of morale in the White House, and especially how does the new president feel about his job? Is he happy? Does he have regrets? And some of this information is pretty damn interesting. They say that Trump's mood has careened between surprise and anger as he's faced the predictable realities of governing. One source says, quote, he doesn't like this shit. The interviews together paint a picture of a powder keg of a workplace where job duties are unclear, morale among some is low, which seems reasonable. Factionalism is rampant and exhaustion is running high. 2 visitors to the White House last week said they were struck by how tired the staff looks. And it's been 3 weeks.
Right.
A very long time.
Howard Stern this week said that what's amazing is, Donald Trump keeps wanting to go to Mar-a-Lago, keeps wanting to get out of there. And Barack Obama is living Donald Trump's life, and Donald Trump is now living Barack Obama's life, because Obama's, all over the world, hanging out at beaches.
You showed me a picture of Obama playing golf.
Yeah.
Who was he with?
He was with Richard Branson.
It was Richard Branson. He was on like a golf cart with Richard Branson, and he had sunglasses on. He was in the front, and he had his hat on backwards.
Yeah.
He had a baseball hat on backwards and a golf shirt,
So
and
relaxed.
sunglasses, and sitting in the back, and like, yeah, this is awesome.
After 8 years of this, I think his hair is going to darken. We're going to do that before and after. So we got some more information. Apparently, Trump would like...
That was good,
Thank you. Trump would like to shake up his White House staff less than a month into the job, but knows that it's too soon, and we would attack him for doing that so soon. That's why you're supposed to care about your transition and bringing people who know what they're doing. People say that he wants to spend even more time at Mar-a-Lago, which he's already gone to 2 out of 3 weekends.
Does Melania go down to Mar-a-Lago?
Watch out.
She did last week.
Show some
Last week,
respect.
in a variety of positions.
But we've also heard that she has no intention, apparently, of ever moving to the White House. Originally, it was going to be for a while for Barron. I almost said Bannon. We don't have any connection there. But apparently now it might continue.
I was listening to Ryan Seacrest this morning, and he said that Mar-a-Lago is fantastic.
Yeah? Did he really say that? Oh, okay.
I was going to quote George Stern. I'm going to go. I don't have satellite. I have to go.
You got to listen
exactly.
to terrestrial radio.
Terrestrial radio.
We've got more. And by the way, understand, this information is Politico interviewing people. They know that those people do, in fact, work in the White House. But that doesn't mean that all this information is accurate, obviously. But it's worth discussing. So I just want to make clear, because people are going to be like, well, you don't know for sure. Of course we don't know for sure.
No, we know for sure. Of course we know for sure. But I mean, there's nothing
know
not
that
to
they
know. We
set it
know
up.
who this guy was. We knew who he was. Again, Michael Schur's here on the panel. I mean, I moved to Los Angeles and was like, hey, I saw an interesting episode of The Apprentice last night. And Michael said, don't watch that show. He's the worst person in America. This was in 2001. And I was like, hey, gee, you really don't like Donald Trump. I think he's kind of an engaging host, And then no one's ever been more right about a person ever than Michael was about Trump. And he believed it. And that was by 2001, you'd already believed it for 12 years.
I've been tired of it.
He was already tired of talking about it.
I couldn't believe, honestly, this is the truth. I couldn't believe they gave him a show.
Right.
So now we're at a totally different level of not believing.
country.
Michael was outraged about The Apprentice. So
I was outraged by The Apprentice.
Donald Trump has a strain. I don't know. I'm not a therapist, but I mean, he's the narcissistic personality disorder is suggested. You could tell me that he has borderline personality or some form of bipolar. I would believe all that too. Obviously, untreated. People who have bipolar disorder can get treatment and be okay and function and have a great successful
And there's varying
life.
degrees of it.
I did.
Varying degrees, that's right. But he's psychotic in some ways, and therefore the people willing and drawn to work with him are the kind of people drawn to that psychosis and drawn to that sort of personality. And there is something wrong with those people who are making a choice. Like, again, if you're in love with someone who is that way, you make sacrifices because that's the person you love. People drawn to it are strange, fringe figures. That's why Bannon is there. That's why these cabinet members fit in. That's why Betsy DeVos. That's why he thinks that Betsy DeVos makes sense, and why DeVos thinks that makes sense, and why Pruitt makes sense. These sort of fringe figures are drawn there, and I suspect and Mike Flynn, who something is wrong with that guy.
You think there's something wrong with Jeff Sessions?
But that's why they're
Rule 19. Don't even imply there's something wrong with Jeff Sessions.
But here's one of the things that's
Jimmy
wrong with these
persisted.
people: just sort of basic old school racists. That's what's wrong with that.
Yeah,
that
true.
it could be as simple as that. So the White House is going to be filled with Kellyanne Conways, people willing to make very peculiar sacrifices and say things that are just Sean Spicer. They say things that are crazy.
Repeatedly untrue.
Sean
Mike
Spicer
Pompeo was nuts in Congress.
nuts. Right, that's right. These are the people drawn to this, and there are plenty of Republicans who we disagree with, who may even support Trump, but they're like, I'm not gonna, like, that's a scene. They at least know that. So no, I believe it to be all true because he's a crazy person hiring people attracted to crazy people.
Which makes me wonder about Steve Mnuchin because whatever you think of his banking history and what he does, he must sit in that room because by all other accounts he seems pretty normal. It's like, I just worked in a bank and I opened a studio and now I'm sitting here with these nuts, Right. And so she's like Marilyn on the Munsters. That's what he's like to me because he's just this guy and all the other people are crazy.
Yeah. Well, let's get into a little bit more because some of this starts to get into a little bit scarier territory. First off, sources close to Trump said he's infuriated by the profusion of leaks revealing his confrontational phone calls with the world leaders. I can certainly understand that. That seems fair. Also, a culture of fear and paranoia is developing, pitting the president and his allies against career NSC staff assigned from other agencies, the National Security Council. The Trump circle believe those career bureaucrats are out to get them, while NSC staffers are concerned the president isn't up to the job and resent the politicization of the agency by appointing Bannon to the council.
Right. So those are people who came to work for other people and aren't like that, and they're exposed to these people, and they're like, whoa! Like, I'm firsthand seeing it. And then the crazy people think that the normal people are out to get them. And again, big range of normal. Could be people we disagree with on literally everything, but have a basic sort of human interaction function that not just Trump, but the people willingly working for him, close to him, must also have. Corey Lewandowski. There's something wrong with that guy. Everybody knows there's something wrong with that guy.
Yeah, that's true.
But Ben, the Nixon people thought everyone was out to get them too. The other thing, the world leaders thing, the leaks. It's not a leak if you hang up on the president of Australia and the Australian press reports it. That's not a leak, Mr. Trump. And so even the way that there's such a naivete that because of this motley crew that they brought in there, there's such a naivete about the way things even work on a day-to-day basis. It's a dysfunctional, in the real sense of the word, it's a dysfunctional White House.
Isn't figuring out who leaked it? First of all, the leaks could obviously come from Australia.
That's what I'm saying. But it was reported on because it was, the President of Australia said, or Prime Minister, the president just hung up on me.
But because how many people were in that room? If you know who,
these conversations are supposed to be recorded. Most of them end up being recorded.
Right. So I guess
some suspiciously do not.
But they happen pretty quickly. So there's only I would imagine 3 or 4 Trump people in that room. For those calls.
They are investigating to try to find out who it is, and I have no doubt that they'll find someone that they at least think was the one. But a little bit more for you. And this is my favorite, perhaps. Sources said Trump often asks simple questions about his job, and he usually changes the subject when discussions become too detail-oriented to make it seem as if he's in control.
That's what I do.
Trump prefers to hand off detailed questions to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, or to Steve Bannon or Paul Ryan. But here's the most serious part, perhaps. Those sources also revealed that Trump has privately expressed disbelief that judges, bureaucrats, and lawmakers are able to halt him from filling government positions or implementing policies.
He's going to come out of this and he's be like, that Obama was great.
How did he do it?
He did it all. He got how many things filled? So all these positions in the White House, he got guys hired and they were doing. Whoa, man! I had no idea.
Yeah, and I saw a poll today. 25% of the country agreed that lawmakers and judges should not be able to overrule the president. I don't know if it's only in the case of Trump, but 25% are saying that Constitution, you can shove it up your shit.
It's weirdly lower than I would have guessed. Like if you said guess how many, I would have said a higher number because
authoritarian leader, let him do his job,
and they sense it as being anti-Trump, and less than half the country.
I think it's an encouraging number. All these polls are discouraging. Again, there were 28% of Americans in 2008 thought George Bush did a good job.
Yeah,
it's better than 1 in 4 people were still like, nailed it.
Katrina,
Iraq War, no, perfect. So on Old School this week, none of you guys were here, but I was with Wes Clark and JR, and we covered what I thought was my favorite story of the week was that, and it points to this example of what Jimmy does, what we all do to some extent. you know, when you're in an interview and you're like, I know one thing, let me mention that one thing, and then we're going to talk about the Oakland A's. Right? I'm going to turn the conversation to something else. So Trump called Mike Flynn, according to the Huffington Post, at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yes,
Yeah.
to
ask him whether the dollar should be strong, whether it was good to have a strong dollar or a weak dollar, right? And Mike Flynn, in the best moment Mike Flynn has had, was like, it's not really my area of expertise. You know, I mean, I would have guessed strong.
I would have guessed strong.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would have guessed strong. There's a case to be made in certain
Wes
areas.
explained it was like, who's asking? It depends, you know, what you're doing for people coming in.
The president is asking.
Right, right. So,
How about when that happens?
so Mike Flynn said maybe you should call an economist.
Yeah.
And Trump got mad at that response.
Called him fake news and hung up.
Right, well, did hang up, but was furious that he didn't have an answer and that he didn't know. And I'm thinking Trump was probably too embarrassed to ask
An economist.
Steve Mnuchin. You know, or
Yeah,
whatever.
especially because this is a president who has no political or military experience, but he does fill his CV with glowing reviews of his international business and trade experience.
Become a member of the Young Turks.
I think it's weird.
No, it's not. Afterwards, you'll think
You know, I'm like a smart person.
TUITnetwork.com/join.